Hello again, everybody. This is Lori Grace Bailey, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Storm Before the Calm podcast. We are talking with my guest today, is a very special guest, Seth Price, and he has some really cool things to say and has a lot of experience chasing storms and studying meteorology, and I cannot wait to get into the weeds with Seth. Let me just briefly tell you a little bit about who Seth is. Seth Price has been chasing severe weather since 2003 and maintains an active weather blog. Professionally, he is a lab associate/instructor for the chemical engineering department at New Mexico Tech, as well as a tutor for Magdalena High School in New Mexico. He occasionally leads a high school storm chasing team on a week-long storm chase. I wish I had that back in high school. Seth holds a BS in Material Science and Engineering from Virginia Tech, an MS in Materials and Metallurgical Air Engineering from New Mexico Tech, and a second BS in Meteorology from Mississippi State. Outside of teaching and tutoring, Seth freelances as a technical writer and editor. He also holds an amateur radio license, N3MRA. You'll have to be able to tell me that, and I'm not too familiar with ham people, but you have radios and all sorts of gear all over your vehicle. So who is Seth Price? And tell us a little bit about yourself. Seth, welcome to the Storm Before the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, so that pretty much covers it. I do a lot of things, and none of them were a deliberate path. I just kind of ended up going different ways. We'll get into that, I'm sure, throughout this. I spend probably the highlights there. I've been chasing for a long time. I was part of the Virginia Tech storm chase crew before they had a meteorology program there. And when I graduated, the game was, do I wait for there to be a meteorology program and just hang out in Blacksburg, or do I move on with my life and wait for there to be one?
Wow.
And so from that, sure. All right. So as far as meteorology, and I mentioned in the bio there with Magdalena schools,
Mm-hmm.
I got that idea because my very first couple of storm chases were while I was a college student, but my instructor, who went on to teach at Virginia Tech in meteorology, he worked at a high school at the time and had pioneered a program like that. And so now I've been tutoring at this rural high school in New Mexico for going on 10 years, 9 years, something like that. And at some point, I got talking with the principal, and they said, hey, if you want to take some kids chasing for a week, we can figure out how to navigate it. And so
No
I say
way.
occasionally, but what happened is we started the program in 18, and then we took a couple years off with COVID and some of the restrictions and such, and we just restarted it last year. But it's a different experience than chasing with my normal crew and everything because
Right.
they're high school kids and they don't know meteorology yet, and so we kind of go out and we keep our distance a lot farther away from the
Sure.
storms and a lot tougher calls sometimes as to what that's about.
Man, I mean, even if I could have learned to chase back when I was in high school, I wanted to go to Texas Tech. I think
Mm-hmm.
Texas Tech still has a meteorology program.
Yeah.
Back in the day, back in the late '80s, early '90s,
Mm-hmm.
they had a really strong program over basically tornado chasing, right? And I don't even think
Yeah.
that it was called storm chasing back in the day. And they were studying tornadoes, and I wanted to do that too. If I only had someone like you to say, "Hey, come on out with me. I'll keep you safe. I promise your parents, that I'll take you out, but we'll still see the awesome stuff, but we'll keep you out of the dangerous path." Man, what is the reactions? I want to know what the kids are feeling, Seth, when you get out there and you take them and they start seeing a rotating mesocyclone, and they're just high schoolers, but they've never seen anything like it before. And
Sure.
you bring them up close and personal to what is their reaction, man? I bet you've started a bunch of new younger storm chasers as a result, right?
Some, and what it is, it's kind of an interesting scenario. A lot of the kids I take have not gone very far. One of the students I took had never left the county, and grew
Wow.
up on a ranch, had never left the county. And probably the thing they were most excited about was they said, hey, I hear there's this place called a Waffle House. Can we go to a Waffle House while we're on the road? And so I never know
Oh,
what to expect. Last year I took them on the deadest week of chasing there was, the first week of May. we saw our very first cloud in well, you could probably guess, but we saw it in Clovis, and that was on our way back. We saw a couple severe thunderstorms. They weren't no rotating wall clouds or anything, just borderline severe, little hail. But what's really neat is taking the kids out there and just showing them that, even though the school that they're in is very small, I think it's 300 kids, pre-K to 12. I mean, 12 students graduating class, something like that.
Sure.
And so showing them, driving them through all these other little towns, and showing them that there's an entire world out there. That's as much the chase as seeing storms. We've on these trips, we've actually avoided a bunch of tornadoes unintentionally, but it's just the calls you have to make with high school kids. So I think 19 we had our best chase, and we were right behind a storm, but we were behind it, and that was fine. It was beautiful sunset, and they all loved it. They just hadn't seen anything quite like that. We were in East Texas, or not East
Sure.
Texas. We were in I think like Post or someplace like that in Texas, and I take another teacher with me as well, and of course she
Hmm.
has a great time, just
Oh,
so that I've
cool.
got backup for having multiple kids. So
Absolutely.
uh,
Chaperone.
that was that was the fun part, was having them come out and see that. But it's amazing how big the world is, and most high school kids don't see that, especially from
Right.
rural towns.
I hear
Um,
you.
we had one kid, and I'll tell you this story. I had a kid that they needed some insulin, and they didn't bring enough. So their parents said, well, we'll call ahead and order it, and so you can pick it up. Well, they have no idea, that even the parents have no idea how big things are. So we said, well, where did you call it in? And they're like, well, in Texas at a Walgreens. And it's like, well, where in Texas? It's like, well, Houston's in Texas, right? And it's like, well, yes, but it's like 12 hours from us. Like, they had no idea that how big some of these spaces are. We got it switched around and all, but what was funny about that was just, for these students, driving an hour away is a big deal. And
Right.
it's like, no, we're going to be on the road the whole time. And a week is about as long as we go, both because it's during their school year. I've noticed new chasers in about a week is when all the little things start to add up, and you start to get the little conflicts start to develop.
Oh, yeah.
So week's a good time. We go back and everybody's cool.
That's good.
So,
Just enough time to have fun and get him out of there
yep,
just before the drama starts. Love it. Love it.
yep.
What about you? You've been doing this for a long time. Just for those of you who are joining and don't know, I only met Seth once, and it was about it was in 2021, or was it 2022?
2022,
Was
yeah.
Yeah, 2022, out near Grand Island, Nebraska, and my friend and I had already chased storms up in northwestern Nebraska. So at the end of the day, we had to drive all the way to Grand Island, because the very next day we met up with Seth and Catherine Prosiv. I always mess up her last name, but Catherine and a bunch of other wonderful women who chase storms. Also, the Today Show was actually doing a really cool segment on women who chase storms and women who are in science and STEM and all that good stuff. So I got to meet Seth out there. He was out there with, I think you had Catherine with you and some other friends too, right? At the
Yeah,
time? Seth
yep.
drives, by the way. You'll know it's Seth when you see a Crown Victoria. Hopefully, it's not a police car with lights and sirens pulling you over because you're going too fast on this, but you'll see that white car. Uh, Seth, I want to real quickly, since you have a Crown Victoria, you chase in an old Crown Victoria that's got a lot of miles on it. You opened that back door, and I immediately knew those hard seats meant that it was a police interceptor at one point. What made you decide to get a police interceptor, re- retired police interceptor, to chase storms in?
So, okay, more stories. I chased for years with a Chevy Malibu, and I loved it. And finally broke down real hard in a hail core. And I still have the Malibu. I brought it back here, put another engine in it. It's my daily driver. But the Crown Vic, I bought it because it got it relatively cheap. I'd always wanted
Right.
one, and people are like, "Oh, because it's fast and all that." And I mean, first gear is really nice. Being able to pull out in
Oh, I bet.
chase convergence or something, that's really nice. What I really did though was I liked that it has a good alternator, so I can run lots of stuff because I run lots of amateur radio gear, not just while I'm chasing, but the rest of the time. I do a lot of travel, and I have a game where I'm trying to drive through every county, so um, I have different radio games I play with that. So I needed a lot of power,
Right.
electrical power, I should say. My stepson was 15 at the time and pretty close to 6 feet tall. So the days of stuffing him in the back of a Malibu or in the jump seat of my Ranger were about done.
No doubt.
And then the other thing I really liked about it was it was big enough that I could take a lot of stuff for when we travel.
That trunk
Um,
space, though, man, the
yeah,
trunk space is
the trunk
amazing.
the trunk space, and it's super easy. If I need to just pull over and sleep, I can just sleep in it. Um, and the fact that it's an old police car, the funny thing with that is how hard it is to go places, especially with the antennas I've got on it.
Oh
I
yeah,
do
yeah.
everything I can to break up that it's a police car because when I start driving somewhere, all of a sudden everybody slows down, puts both
Oh
hands on the
crap.
wheel, buckles their seatbelts, and I'm like, guys, I just want to go to work.
Yeah.
And the seats you mentioned, um, because I live in Albuquerque, which if you look up crime statistics, you can see how wonderful of a place it is. Once my car has been broken into and the real
Oh
seat been
man.
stolen out of it because of course, the Crown Vics came with a plastic seat, and twice I've had to replace that seat because, or well, I should say three times, because what happened is I put a real seat in it, got broken into, somebody stole the seat. Didn't touch the radio gear, stole the seat. Put in another seat, got stolen again. Put in another seat, and that's the one I've got now. And sometimes when I'm not chasing for a little while, I'll take the seat out because I'm like, I don't want it stolen again. I don't want to break any more windows to steal the seat. So you
Oh
mentioned that hard
man.
seat, and I was like, yep, that's been the bane of my existence. So my problem is I get attached to vehicles. Like I have no common
Oh
sense
yeah.
about that. At about a little under 300,000, I put another transmission in it. It does eat transmissions pretty quick. I say that I put in one, um,
Mm,
but then
that's not bad.
the engine the engine now. What happens is occasionally the odometer will flash and it tells me what miles I have on it, but then it goes dim again and I don't see it for months. So the last time I saw it, it was like three.
Wow. Well, I definitely know, like, we see a lot of Subarus, we see a lot of Forerunners. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
distinguish people out there, but if I see that, I know where Seth is. So, not to mention you're a ham operator. We'll get into that in a few
Mm-hmm.
minutes, but man, you've got these. You can talk to people far, far away, right? Do you
Mm-hmm.
use that when
Oh
you're
yeah.
storm chasing? You use the ham radio?
So when I'm actually so when I'm storm chasing, I use more local stuff. I talk to some of the other Virginia Tech Hokies or alumni, I should say, that are also all ham radio operators. I inadvertently started the ham radio program there because
Oh,
our meteorology instructor interested in it, and then it's basically been something that he's pushed and got all the students to do. So Catherine's got one,
oh, no
Alex Thornton,
kidding.
all the other folks that are out there from Virginia Tech have ham radio. Like I said, I'm trying to operate from every county. So sometimes we'll be driving and it'll be a route, and I'll say, "Hey, Catherine, we're not in a rush. Let's like take this little bit longer route because it'll be new counties." And with the antennas I've got, I can talk all over the world. Just yesterday,
Oh,
I talked to
that's cool.
France and Switzerland from that car, so it's not
No
that
kidding.
not that hard to do. For storm chasing, it's not. For storm chasing, sometimes I'll even take it down because it's a lightning rod.
Right.
But then for local communication, I'm on ham radio pretty
That's
frequently.
so cool. I was,
Sure.
Catherine, you've known Catherine for how many years? Did I not see you in some of those old? Catherine is one of the
Oh yeah.
oldest female chasers that we know of, or that I know of personally. Who I know of.
Now, if you interview her later, she's going to
I
tell
would
you a
love to.
different version of this story, and I'm going to tell you the way it really happened, and then she's going to tell her version. It's
Okay,
pretty
you're
fun.
hearing this
Um,
now.
so I'm glad that I'm like second or third.
You get
So what?
first dibs on the story.
So what happened is I chased with from 2003 to 2006. I chased with Virginia Tech, and off and on, the meteorology instructor would say, "Hey, I want you to come back out, come lead one of our chases, blah blah blah." But they were having a lot of trouble. I mean, I wouldn't say they're having a lot of trouble. They were getting their program started. So at some point, they weren't going to pay to have me come out from New Mexico to lead a chase when they've got graduate students literally right there. And so I don't know exactly when it happened, but there was a miscommunication. I actually delayed the closing of my house because I thought I was going to go chasing with Virginia Tech, and I didn't. Like, I just didn't hear from them again.
Yeah.
So I closed on my house and I went out chasing, and I ran into Virginia Tech. And I was like, "Hey," and so this little squeaky kid comes up and she's like, "Hi, I'm Catherine." And I'm like, "Okay, so this is my replacement. Like, I got, what am I supposed to say to you? Like, hi?" But
Right.
I mean, we got along right away. It was great fun. That would have been 2011, I think, 2012, something like that. And now the way she tells the story, and I'll tell you just the way she's like, "Oh, and then Seth hated me for 2 years." No, it wasn't quite like that. But we had kept in touch, and there were different times. And I've chased on my own and chased with other groups, and I would run into the Hokies because, of course, I learned from the same people, from the same instructors, so end up in the same places. And about 17, the meteorology instructor had a death in his family. His wife passed away, and he wasn't going to go. So I reached out to all the Hokies I knew and said, "Hey, who wants to go?" And she was the first one to respond. It was like, "I'll go." And so
wow.
we partnered up and have basically chased pretty much since then. We took a year off. I went out, but I think she took a year or two off with the pandemic. It's a lot easier for me to get out, though, from New Mexico versus, her coming from the East Coast. So
Right.
but we've kind of paired up since then. And then we also team up with Alex Thornton, who's another Hokie, but he typically drives his own vehicle. So we just
That's
kind of
so
meet
cool,
up.
man. That's so
Yeah.
cool. And to see you and to hear about Catherine's story, to see some of the photos of you all from back then, there's such a cool feeling from you all to be able to reminisce. For people like me who are relatively new chasers, it's so cool to see these images. And to be honest with you, seeing people like Catherine chasing and you guys out there just treating her and everybody, just being so open to the diversity of just, it doesn't matter who you are, come chase with us. We want to get out there. We all have a passion for this. I was going to say the fact that there were so few women chasers back then, and to see them is such an inspiration for me. So, and to see people like you just like, "Hey, let's all get after it," and just not giving a crap about that, just wanting to get in there and chase and enjoy that same passion for weather that everybody has. It's such a cool, personally, and that's what I wanted to say, is it's inspiring to me, and I have a lot of respect for all of you guys that have gone way before us. You said you've been chasing since 2003 or something like that. I mean, that's incredible. What an opportunity.
That's been what's interesting too, because I see, it's like my first storm chase. I think Dave Carroll, our meteorology instructor, I think he had a cell phone that kind of worked sometimes, but
Wow.
I had like a 1 megapixel digital camera that was pretty much garbage by today's standards. And I think I left and was gone for 3 weeks, and I didn't call anybody because it's like, well, I'm not calling from the hotel phone. Man, I got like a weird reflection. This is cool.
I see that.
But but yeah, I mean, like I left for 3 weeks. I didn't have email, phone, anything. My parents, I was a college student, but my parents were like, "How long till we file a missing persons report?" Because all we know is you rode off into the sunset.
Yeah.
And they've been super supportive. That was, but they knew what I was doing. But it's funny because like my first couple storm chases, we did things like I have somewhere I have a bunch of old atlases where we would listen to the weather radio, and great fun to listen to. They'll sit there and Dalhart, the temperature is blah blah blah,
Yeah.
and dew point is, and we'd draw all that out, and we'd hand draw frontal boundaries and dry
My
lines and all, and that was
goodness.
it. We didn't have radar, we didn't have satellite. That was how we chased. And now it's like I think one of the early chases I was with Catherine, I said something to her. I said, "This is amazing. We're sitting under an overhang watching a hail core. We've got almost live radar. We've brought up Nebraska Department of Transportation. We know which roads are under construction. We can plot and figure out how far things are with GPS. None of this existed when I first started, and it was just
Wow.
amazing that we're sitting there and dividing up these tasks. And in the old days, it was like, oh well, we'll have cell phone service in Amarillo and Oklahoma City, and maybe spotty places in between. We would call back to Roanoke to the TV station and get updates when we had cell
Oh
service,
my
and we'd call
goodness.
back then. I think it was Robin Reed, and I think he's retired now. But we would call him and say, "We're thinking, this area, Elk City or someplace," and he'd say, "Yeah, that's looking good," and then we'd go sit in a parking lot.
That's insane. And I think of you guys as old fogies, and I know I'm older than you are, but it's so funny because we take advantage. We take for granted, I should say, all the cool stuff that's at our fingertips. One phone is really all you need to get. Hopefully, you'll be in most of the areas that you're going to chase and have coverage, and you still lose coverage, but us newer chasers like, this is crap. Verizon and T-Mobile, I couldn't get any service out there, and on the in the near the Badlands, and I didn't have any service in Nebraska in the Sand Hills. This is ridiculous. And you guys are just looking at us like, yeah, suck it up, Buttercup, because we had to do it with maps, and we didn't have all that stuff at our disposal like we do now. So yeah, that must have been really, really fun looking back on it now, how you had to learn to chase. You had to learn to sniff the dirt. People always laugh at me that I love to use that phrase, but you really did have to keep your eyeballs to the sky to make the decisions that you needed to do to keep safe for the most part.
That's part of it. I will say, of course, and I'm as much of a baby about that now too. I'll just be like, "Are you kidding me? Like, why can't I be live streaming right now? Why is this not working?"
Yeah.
And sometimes you do just have to punt and just start everything off. Like, okay, we're just going to go once there's a storm on the ground. Once there's a storm, radar's really, really nice to have, and it allows us to get a whole lot closer than we did back in 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
Things like even things like I say, being able to determine what road is paved and which ones aren't, which ones are just going to turn into a mud fest.
Yeah.
Um, that's so useful, and what it is it's done two things. Number one, in the old days it was, hey, if you're a rookie and you don't know what you're doing, the good news is you'll probably be safe because you're not going to get anywhere near a storm, and you can figure out why that is and develop. But
Yeah.
now the kind of the downside, the good news is now as a chaser you can be a lot safer because you have all these tools. The downside of that is it's like, well, I've got Radar Scope Pro. I can do what I want. And it's like, there's a little more to it than that, and that's
Sure.
something that is really hard to explain, and you kind of have to experience it. I have this with the high school kids. I bring this up like, hey,
Right.
I think a lot of them, no matter how many times they say it, when we go out there, they think we're just going to find where there's a warning and we're going to drive to it, right? Or we're going to find the worst spot on radar and we're going to drive to it, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
no, we're not going to do it that way. So,
But growing up, I wonder what drew you to weather, what drew you to chasing this extreme stuff too, because we're not just saying, yeah, Seth kind of liked when it rained. Well, that has nothing to do with what we're
sure.
doing here. You had to what brought you into this, and growing up, how did you fall in love with storms, and what drew you out to the middle of nowhere to eventually do this?
Sure. So it's kind of a twofold story. When I was about four, how they have like Shark Week and stuff like that. It was super rainy. I lived in Maryland at the time. Grew up in Maryland, and super rainy. Couldn't go outside and play. And they had a tornado special. I say tornado special. It was like a day of tornadoes. So it was the
Right.
old 1986 Nova special. I'm
Oh
dating myself
yeah.
here. You could start doing some calculations, to figure out exactly how old I was. But anyway, it was the Nova special and a couple others, and I was like, "Wow, this is super cool." I didn't know anything about that. Somewhere I have an old government manual that's probably about that thick that was printed out of, I don't know, just it was an instruction manual for some piece of equipment that's long since obsolete. And my
Yeah.
dad gave it to me, and it had a lot of blank pages in it. And it's completely full of tornado drawings. I thought Toto was the coolest thing ever. And
Right.
my role in chemical engineering is basically instrumentation. So it's like, this is like neat stuff. And
For the person who's listening and who doesn't know what Toto is, why don't you explain that to
yeah,
them? They
yeah.
might have
So
seen Twister and
Toto.
Dorothy, but they don't know what Toto is.
So yeah, Twister with Dorothy. It's an instrument pack, and it's based on a real thing that happened in the '80s. And it was called Toto, and it basically was a pretty heavy instrument pack. I mean, looked a lot like Dorothy. That's the whole idea. And I had different measurements on it, pressure and temperature and such. So as about a 5 and 6 year old, I was like, oh, okay, we need to measure pressure and temperature and all these things. I remember talking to my father, who's an electrical engineer, about what's the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
And he's all like, oh, well, 9/5 X plus. And I'm like, I have no idea. I was, 6 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
But that was my early interest. In fact, it's really fitting that we met in Grand Island because probably the book I learned to read on, like my very first chapter book was Night of the Twisters, which
Story of
was
Grand
about the
Island.
Grand Island outbreak. Yep, 1980.
Wow.
And so I about wore out the copy at, there's another thing. It's funny now because I just buy it on Amazon today. Back then I had to go to the Carroll County Public Library and rent, borrow it.
Right.
And I about wore that copy out because that was my favorite book. And so I said it was twofold. That was how I got interested in it.
Mm.
And long about high school, I was looking at, what career options and all, and I read a statistic, and I don't know if it's real or not. At the time, it said that, there's one job for every 8 meteorology students. And I said, well, I obviously can't do that because I know I'm struggling with some of my classes and stuff. Like I ain't gonna be that one out of the 8 that's gonna make it. And so
Wow.
I didn't pursue it. I went into engineering, and then kind of the. So this is a really long story. This is getting my whole life in
It's
here, but
okay. That's what
um,
that's what this is about. I want to know about that. We want to know. We want to hear that storm chasing is just you're more than just the cool dude that drives a cool Crown Vic and takes people out chasing. You're more than that. That's what I want to
I
get
think
into, and I'd love to hear this.
perfect. So funny story. It's funny looking back, but basically the first couple years of college, I didn't do very well. I struggled through school. I was studying to be an electrical engineer like my father, and I was dating this girl, and we had a core group of friends, and the big thing was fear of missing out. Like when we were hanging out, it was like you didn't even want to go to the bathroom because you're going to miss an inside joke, and like you just didn't want to miss. And basically, I think we went on spring break, my like third year in college, and I was like looking at rings, and she met somebody else. And
Oh,
so I came back, and it was like, oh, this has all changed. And then my like core group of friends really kind of were more of her friends. So I was out by myself. And that, that was a big deal. But the kind of the funny thing is out of that, it was kind of like, well, what did I like to do? Because I've been hanging out with these people, and they're to this day they're all my friends, and all ended up working out. We're all good friends, but it was like, what did I like to do before I hung out with all these people?
yeah.
And so that's when I got back into amateur radio, got back into Storm, and kind of just the end little piece to this was, and I'm going to actually move my camera. You're not going to see this. You may not see this. There is a really crappy 80s car on the wall.
I see that.
That is a 1988 Chevy Nova. And I have one of those, I have two of them. That was my car in college. I love that car. Now it's a piece of junk overall. You won't find them because they
Right.
were junk. About the time I was like, I don't think I can afford to do some of the repairs to this and go chasing with that next spring. I was in a dining hall and I was like going through the numbers on paper. I was like, I need this, I need this. I'm not gonna be able to do it. I saw a flyer for the Virginia Tech Storm Chase,
Oh wow.
and I think it was their first or second one. And so I was like, well, I think I can come up with the money for that or the car repair, but not both. So I went with Virginia Tech. And,
JC car
so the
car
rest is,
repair.
yeah.
Who needs
And
that?
campus, you could kind of walk everywhere. It wasn't a big deal.
Right.
Um, and some of the things I could do myself, but I wasn't about to do it. Um, between then and exams to go chasing for 2 weeks, and so that was kind of how I got into it. And so it's kind of funny. It's like that kind of set a whole bunch of stuff in motion because like I say, I'm friends with all the people. It's amazing what happened. So like right after we graduated, there was the big shooting at Virginia Tech, and of course everybody knew
Right.
somebody.
Right.
And so even with my ex and all these people, we all kind of got back in touch because it was like, hey, did you know somebody? How you doing? What's going on?
Right.
And so we all ended up being friends. And I look at their lives, and I'm like, I wouldn't like. I thought I wanted the white picket fence and the 2.3 children and the like stable, good job, whatever that
Yeah.
means. And now I'm like, oh yeah, no, like I think nothing of, hey, I mean, I've driven like 6 hours out of the way for barbecue. Like I just kind of do whatever I want, and I like that so much better than having a nice place in the suburbs and
You.
all the fancy things that like all of my friends kind of wanted. Now I'm
Right.
like, I come home and the first thing I think about is, well, where can I go next?
You've been all over the
So
place. Then you've been in pretty much every state in the plains. Then do you ever chase Dixie also?
I've been to every state except Alaska and Hawaii. I haven't
Wow.
chased all of them. Dixie Alley, I kind of picked my battles. When I did my second bachelor's at Mississippi State, it was mostly online. In fact, it was all online. But I had toyed around with what would happen if I moved there, and if I had moved
You.
there, I definitely would have chased Dixie Alley. But from New Mexico, I'm like 2 or 3 days of rough, semi-dangerous Dixie Alley chasing is a week of plains chasing in May. So it's
Right.
really really hard to get me to do that. Now I did chase a storm just because I was going through. A couple times I've been passing through and chased storms. I caught a severe storm. It wasn't a tornado in Louisiana one time, and that was just awful road network, swamps everywhere.
Right.
And
Right.
I have a lot of respect for the ones that really do well in the
Right.
Dixie Alley chasing, but it is definitely not for the
Faint of
weak.
heart.
It is
Right.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
it is tough. And
Wow.
I chased Appalachia there for a while when I was at Virginia Tech, and it kind of similar thing where it's like there's mountains and no
You're
roads and
in the woods
trees
and
and
everything. Yeah.
yeah, and
Dang.
so I
Well,
picked
Seth,
my battles that way.
you've been doing this for a long, long time. At least, I mean, I would, looking back, I don't know how many years I have ahead of me. I just know that as many opportunities as I can make, I'm going to chase. And I don't know how long I've got to do that, but I don't have those years to look back. And for me, I don't want to lose any more opportunities that I can, and looking back, you must have seen days and some cool days and some okay days and some really crap cat busts as well. But what's one of your most memorable experiences of chasing?
So, looking at it's hard. I was on the Hallam, Nebraska storm 2004, which was the ended up becoming the up until El Reno was the widest tornado that
Wow.
ever been. Now we saw it at its initiation before it got dark, but that was a crazy day. I saw the Dodge City outbreak. That day was amazing, just because I think we drove like 200 miles and we're there. And I spent so much time watching tornadoes. I had a film camera that I'd thrown in the car that I inherited, and I never used it. I sat there and pulled out the manual and was like, okay, there's two tornadoes on the ground right this second. It's all one big meso, but like you got one and a satellite vortex, and it's like, okay, how do I adjust some of the settings? And I'm sitting here reading a camera manual because the tornadoes have been on the ground just constantly, one right after another. And
Wow.
but then my two probably absolute favorite chases. Sorry, you asked for a good moment, and I'm giving you like 10.
No. Oh, I
Um,
can imagine how many you have on the.
Selden in 20. I never had a storm chase day go like clockwork like that. It was. I thought we were going to bust. I was up in Holyoke, Colorado, and I knew we
Hmm.
needed to get south, but we were out of laundry. I should mention I chased with my girlfriend pretty frequently too,
Oh, cool.
and she was with me, and we had our cats with us. We had two cats with us,
Oh my
and
goodness.
so they got to see their first tornado.
Wow.
But we just things didn't look like it was going to work out. And then it was like we got on the right road and it moved parallel to the storm. And it was just like, I've never had it come together so well. And like we'd be so close and yet so safe for where we were. You know, we were out of the hail, we were out of everything. That's a big thing. I've never lost a windshield, knock on
Really?
wood. I didn't even have hail dents. I'll blame Catherine, even though it ain't her fault. I
Uh,
never had hail dents until I hung out with Catherine.
oh, shoot.
But and she doesn't get hail
It's your
dents either.
fault,
That's why we
Catherine.
chased together. Yeah, that's why we chased together. Actually, it wasn't even her fault. We were the storm cruiser folks had a basically an armored vehicle, and we were kind of tagging along with them, and just
Right.
got a little too close. But we never lost a window, so that's the way I chase. Anyway, so Sylvan was a perfect setup. Just I couldn't have planned it better. Like if I was giving an example to the high school kids, I couldn't have come up with a like more textbook scenario. So that was beautiful. And then this last year, everybody laughs at my pictures. I had a great time. I'm not a photographer. The was it Stratford? I can't think of the name of the town now. Stratford,
Last year?
Texas
Yeah.
tornado.
Stratford was, yeah.
Yeah, and Catherine and I were on what would be considered the wrong side, and her and I have caught several storms from the west, and
Hmm.
we've done that because we stayed out in the hail court and been west of storms or kind of even southwest, and several times we've caught tornadoes that way. And so everybody
Yeah.
else looks in and they see this menacing kind of low contrast thing. We're on
Right.
the back side and it was lit up. The only thing is, if you're a photographer, all I've got are power lines everywhere, power lines and power poles, and
I hate
it's
that.
a mess. But
Yeah.
I was like, I got it, it's there.
Yeah.
And that one was another day where it was like it was a super relaxed chase day. Like we went,
Right.
we got food, we walked around the park, we watched a couple cells, and then it was kind of like, let's look at this one, and it all just kind of worked out. As far as busts, we had some blue sky busts. I don't know. I know a lot of people get really upset about that, and
Yeah.
I I I haven't. I've never been really. I mean, it's disappointing, of course, but it's
Right.
disappointing in the way that it's like, okay, the baseball team lost today.
Mhm.
The hardest, I say, the hardest ones have been with high school kids because I've had to make calls that if I was with my storm chase crew, we wouldn't have made. But
Sure.
Sudan
Sudan.
tornado back
Yeah.
in in
Oh, that was
19,
beautiful.
we were
Oh,
we were on the wrong side of it, and if I if it had been Catherine and my regular crew,
a little more
we'd
gung
have got in
ho.
front of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but what I had was I had a kid that I had a bunch of kids.
Mm.
They lived on a diet of fast food and Mountain Dew, and one of them was quite ill. And so it's
Oh,
like we
wow.
can make it, but if we have to stop so that she can throw up, like she's done a couple times,
Multiple
we're in
times.
trouble. And so that's the biggest thing is having. I don't know that I could have done that at 23 or 24, but at 40, whatever I was, 40,
Yeah.
I was able to pull the plug on that and be like, well, we're just not going to get in front of it. We're going to see what we can
Right.
see here. And, uh, and they all went and watched whatever it was, Yellowstone, where it was in the, whatever the spinoff. I don't watch TV.
Yeah.
It was featured, Michael Binsky's footage was featured in one of the
Oh,
TV
wow.
shows. And it's like, yep,
Oh, cool.
that was the one we were on the wrong side of,
Oh,
guys. Like,
goodness.
sorry. But those are a little harder. But it's still
Yeah.
like you can put me in that situation 100 times, and I would still make the decision I did. So,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Well, that's like I have to admit, I got close to that storm last year. I know everybody was on the Cap Rock, and it was that storm that came in from forget the name of it, and it almost produced a tornado, but it was so beautiful as it in the middle of the day or the late day, and it was going up the Cap Rock, and everybody could see it, and it was coming from Las Vegas or whatever that area is, and it was
hmm
beautiful. And I turned around, and we decided to go get steak that night at the Big Texan. We
right,
decided
right,
to call it off just because I was a little too close to the forward flank, and I didn't want to get smashed by hail. And
yeah,
if I had continued, I knew that I was probably going to get there when it was too late to see the cool stuff, and I was probably going to be
hmm
dealing with hail. And I trying to
yeah,
keep my, I have to pay for my Honda CRV, and
yeah.
I already had a deer. I didn't hit the deer. The deer hit me. I stopped here near the town of Patagonia. Bunch of deer crossing
Mhm.
the road. I stopped in time thinking, whew, that was close. And then I look over and this final deer comes over the rails and slams right into the driver's side door and bounces off, basically creating a huge dent. I couldn't even get out of the door. And I was stopped, by the way. Stopped. I wasn't driving. I didn't drive into the deer. It slams into
Mhm.
my door. And then it looks at me and it bounds away like, huh, sucks to be you, and then takes off. And then I get out. So I have a huge dent in the side of my CRV that I never fixed because of a deer, and I didn't hit the deer. The deer hit me. So
Yeah.
hail, I'm trying to keep my car in decent shape, and I'm trying
Hmm.
to do that too, and avoid. But we did, looking at the images there, I was kind of biting my lip as we were eating, enjoying the steak, but at the same time, you know what? There's going to be more storms. I can't be too
Yeah.
salty over that. Everybody got beautiful shots, and you're going to have your chance to really enjoy it and capture some amazing things. I wanted to switch gears real quickly with you
Yeah.
and ask you, and additionally, how you mentally prepare. There have been times where you faced, setbacks in your journey, and whether it's deciding, because you have multiple degrees, for Pete's sake. I barely have one. So you have multiple degrees in engineering. That's got to be a lot of study, a lot of math, a lot of work. But in addition to all that, maybe in your personal life, have you had any personal setbacks that have kept you from doing the things that you wanted to do, or either that, or they were responsible for pushing yourself out there and chasing extreme weather?
Sure. Well, and like I told the story a little bit earlier with the X, that really boosted me out. And I won't say it was, I'm not going to be like, and that made, that just all made everything better, going out and
It
chasing
sucked,
storms. But
right?
it helped, and it
Really?
also, kind of what the part of that lives on is that's kind of what I showed the high school kids. I had when I before I started chasing, I had been in 5 East Coast states. I'd never been on a plane. When I drove to Virginia Tech, that was as far south and west as I'd ever been. And so yeah, it seems like your whole world is this little petri dish, or not petri dish, but like a little fishbowl.
Right.
And a lot of the kids at Magdalena are like that, where it's like, hey, they grew up here. Their great grandparents grew up here. There are 12 kids. Who do 12 kids in your graduating class? Who's your significant other? Well, it can't be one of your. Well, maybe
Eef.
could be, but shouldn't be one of your cousins. So you're down to two or three options, and the next town's 30 miles away. And then just being able to go out and be like, there's an entire world filled with towns like that, and bigger ones too.
Wow.
And there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of things to do and things to see. And I got that from that experience. I'll say other things. School was a pretty big struggle. I took 6 years to get a bachelor's degree. I worked full time at night to get through it. My job searches have never been fantastic. I got the opportunity in graduate school because my advisor here, she sought out people who did not, she called them late bloomers that didn't do well to begin with, but then did later. I mean, we had people that had gone to prison. We had um, ex-military folks that had gone to the military and gotten out and wanted to go study something else.
Hmm.
And so she kind of took me under her wing. She was tough,
Right.
but I got through dealing with her. And my probably one of the worst in meteorology was at some point I said I was working full time at Tech during the day teaching and full time at night working at Intel doing semiconductor work. And I decided, well, I'm not doing enough. Plus, helping raise my girlfriend's son and, had a relationship there and everything. And let's go ahead and do the second bachelor's in meteorology. So I started working on that. And it
Wow.
got to the point where I was like, I'm going to apply for some meteorology jobs. And I'll never forget the night that I got auto rejected from all 88 National Weather Service
Ouch.
offices. And it was just one right after the other, one, one,
Oh
one, one.
man.
And it's like, why am I doing this? This is dumb. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to switch careers. I'm competing against people who have straight A's. I graduated with like a 2.5. I'm not.
Hmm.
They're never gonna pick me.
Right.
And I did get a little opportunity job watching. It wasn't a job. I got to sit there and watch the meteorologists, and it was a good opportunity to at least see what happened. And after I was there for a while, I was like, I actually prefer the teaching. I can go storm chasing. I don't need anybody's permission.
Right.
Um, and but it took me a while to get to that. Like that was a struggle because it's like, why am I wasting time on a degree that I'm not, and I'm not saying this to discourage anybody who's out there, getting a meteorology degree. I'm saying I had a lot of dead weight with this other degree that I hadn't done well in, and I
Hmm.
was kind of mid career. I mean, I was probably 35, something like that, when I was doing this.
Yeah.
Had established myself as an engineer, and to change careers and compete against, fresh out of college kids that have meteorology experience, it was tough. I mean, I chase storms, but that's not. There's a lot of people who chase storms that don't have meteorology experience. Um, I'll say I gave up, but not really. I readjusted
Yeah.
my focus. So
How is the Seth today different from the Seth who, was in high school?
so definitely, there's a couple parts to that. Definitely, like I'll say, as a freshman, sophomore in college, I had fear of missing out as the defining characteristic of my life. And
Yeah.
I think that getting out and chasing is kind of, it obviously helped expand, I'll say, my world, and, meeting all different people, going all different places, seeing all these things. But it also, I don't know, I talked about not worrying about getting a bust. So people argue online on Twitter and such, oh, what was the tornado of the year? And I'm like, I don't know, the one I call it. I don't care. I don't mean
Oh,
that
I love that.
callous. I'm just okay, that one. I saw that one. That's why
That's
it's
true.
tornado of the
That's
year,
true.
at least for me. And I
I
don't
think
feel
about
like
that.
I've missed out. Like Fort Stockton Day, I think everybody got pictures of Fort Stockton.
Yeah.
uh, we picked poorly, and I mean, we kind of knew we were picking poorly, but we also knew it was the last day and a couple people needed to fly out. So it was we can't get suckered too far south,
Right.
or we're gonna have a hard day. And so we watched a couple non-severe cells fall apart in the cap, and
Ah,
that was it. And then you get on Twitter and it's oh, look at this monster, and look at all these
right.
things. And for me, it's okay, we could have went that way, but that's the end of it. It's not
Right.
I'm certainly not fear of missing out, oh, I didn't get to see that. Sometimes I think that's the fun part of chasing, is everybody does go and get the one big storm, and then you got the weird little rope that was
Yeah.
on some other storm that nobody saw. And to me,
Absolutely.
that's neat. It's 400 pictures of the same tornado
Yeah.
from,
Uh-huh.
6 feet shifted one way or the other, and you got the one nobody got. And
Yeah.
to me, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So,
That's for
um,
me, that was the
it,
Grady storm, the last year, the
yeah,
nighttime one that
mm,
everybody was sitting on top of the Cap Rock, and tons
mm-hmm,
and it seems like most of them, the images are quite the same, just because that storm just sat and spun, and and everybody uses those
mm-hmm,
images, and yes, I missed that, and it hurts to know that I don't have those shots too. At the same time, I made
mm-hmm,
it through the back. I got to meet Rachel Sander for the first time somewhere out near Roy, on another
mm-hmm,
solo supercell that was just
yeah,
beautiful at sunset. But then we
mm-hmm,
decided to punch through it instead of going back where it was already flooded to get to where everybody
right,
else was. But on the backside, I thought to myself, we're looking back as we're driving towards Las Vegas, Santa Fe area, and I see the flashes of that massive storm, just that supercell, and then we're on the backside of it, and we're pretty far from it, and all of a sudden I think, why don't we try to shoot for sprites? And we pulled off some ranch road, got into the dark,
mm-hmm,
the dark field, and I caught some sprites, and then
mm-hmm,
stars above it. And I was the only one who caught sprites. My friends and I are the only ones who caught sprites that night off that storm, because everybody
yeah,
was getting them, of course, the better epic photos of the storm at night and time lapses. But I still got something that was different, and I'm really happy that
yeah,
I made something out of it, instead of going, instead of, because I used to do that too. I think that really
sure,
changed me, and I
yeah,
love chase. The more you learn that you don't have to have that FOMO that you missed out on something else, or that imposter syndrome
sure,
that somebody else always gets better storms. I think
yeah,
that's a level of maturity. I think overall, as a normal storm chaser, an average storm chaser, you learn to embrace the suck. So sometimes
yeah,
it's just, you're gonna miss stuff, right? I mean, you've probably
yeah,
had a lot of misses.
sure. Oh yeah, and along those lines, I mean, the fear of missing out, the you mentioned the sprite. Also, just being okay. Like our whole chase method. I say our, when I chase with Joanna, my girlfriend, or when I chase with Catherine. Um, Kind of, at some point, I coined the phrase. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's there were tornadoes
Yeah,
before I was born. There's going to be
right.
tornadoes after I'm gone. Every year there's going to be tornadoes.
Mm.
I can't get them all. And I have tremendous respect for some of the chasers that are out there every single day and on every blizzard and every hurricane. Great. And that's good. I'm not quite one of those because I have a time where I can go and
Yeah,
I've got other responsibilities. I pay out of
most of
pocket. You
us
mentioned
do.
this. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the car repair, and it's like, yeah, I hit a deer too. I put things together in a Denver parking lot out of stuff I found at the junkyard.
Wow.
Um, so there's that. You mentioned the imposter syndrome, and I fight that one in a different capacity
Hmm.
because and it's kind of weird. Two modes to that. The first one, there of course there's a lot of discussion about privilege and such, and here I am, this white male that barely made it, struggled through school, and then I'm out there, and it's like, well, what business do I even have? If I have a success, so what? Like, well, is it really a success? I don't know. And at some point, I just kind of got too old for that. I don't know. I just kind of, well, I caught the storms I caught. I did the things I did, and there's no one else to say there.
Seth, but you
And
know what you just said is such a golden nugget that I hope the listeners gain from this is what you said a few minutes ago is that what was the tornado of the year? It was the one that I caught. Right?
mm,
What a beautiful perspective. Like you can see that and you can go, oh man, Tony Lauback got that
yeah,
awesome tornado from underneath it and you could see it and the little satellites inside spinning.
mm,
Oh, I missed that one too, or I missed Fort Stockton with all the giant CGs in front of the
yeah,
storm. I missed this. I missed Fort Stockton, just because it was my chase was over. I had to get back to work and the
yeah,
family and I missed
yeah,
it by like 3 days. And I was like, well, I wasn't there. But I keep talking about the Stratford. I talk about Encino. I mean, I was there to see
yeah,
Encino with two tornadoes, a satellite and the main one. And on top of that, I did all the forecasts. I didn't chase or dot chase, right? I chased on my
mm,
own. And with
sure,
the help of some other friends, of course, hey, what do you think about this? People were saying, a couple of my friends, stay where you are, Lori. You're in the right spot. Don't second guess yourself. You're you have great clear skies. You have towering cumulus. You're not stuck in Roswell with this deck of clouds that has me eroded today. That's bad news. And my brain was saying, yeah, that's why I'm here. I've got sunlight. I've got daytime heating, just cooking things up, and I'm looking at the
yeah,
clouds, and they're all doing this, and they're all starting to do
yeah,
this, and I'm like, yes,
yeah,
my eyes are telling me stay here, and so I'm real proud of myself and for the own personal
sure.
accomplishments, and sticking it through, and the failures are like you said, like, eh. I think I'm with you there. I think
It,
we're the age wise
yeah,
is like, whatever. I'm
it,
happy,
it,
and then learning to be happy for others, right? Like, hey, somebody else got
oh
that.
yeah,
That's great.
sure. And as far as like Encino, if anybody
Hmm.
should be angry about Encino, we we were in Denver. I think we had just the way things worked out. We dropped off Jen Walton up in Denver.
I remember
I had a
that.
flat tire, so we had to replace
Um,
the tire, and then we zoomed down as fast as we could. We targeted Clovis, and it was like, don't stop, we got to get there. The problem with Encino is my parents don't live very far from Encino.
oh wow.
So here I am driving all over creation trying to find tornadoes, and my parents, if they had driven out to the end of their road, would have seen the Encino tornado.
Oh
And
my
you do
goodness.
sometimes get that. We had a tornado in Magdalena a bunch of years ago.
Hmm.
And I was in Kansas that day. It was before I was doing the storm chasing
Huh.
with the kids. But it was like, oh yeah, literally a mile. I'm pointing, but literally a mile down the road there
Yeah.
was a tornado, and you were in Kansas. What were you doing? And you get a little bit of that, but even then, it's like, you could put me in that position again. I probably still went to Kansas. Like
Yeah.
everything was better there.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so yeah, that part of like the imposter syndrome, where it's like, oh, did I really earn this? Is this something? Um, I hear people talk about like how this was a hard chase and it's harder for this person or that person, and I'm like, I don't even know what that actually means because the chase is as hard as I want it to be. If
Yeah.
I wanted the chase to be easy, I could stay
The
at home and
chase is
not
as
chase at
hard as I
all.
want it to
Uh,
be. I love
yeah,
that.
I
I love
mean,
that, man. I love that. And
with
so
the ice, yeah,
you're giving yourself a lot of leeway that the chase is more than
yeah,
just I've got to be right in front of the tornado each and every time with the right camera
yeah,
gear and the right setting, right? Everything has to be perfect or I failed, right? And you're
yeah,
seeing the whole thing as an opportunity that hey, this is a great opportunity that we get to do. And even if we miss it and we're on the wrong side of the storm, who cares, right?
Yeah.
You just learn to
Well,
love the process.
sure. And I'll throw out this little bit here too. So I know a lot of people are photographers, and I've mentioned I'm not a photographer. I had a recurring nightmare for years that I was going to
Hmm.
go chase and realize I'd left my camera. And
Uh,
long after I'd been chasing with Virginia Tech, I talked to Dave Carroll, my meteorology instructor.
hmm
I was like, do you have the like pre-chase nightmare where you're like, I'm gonna get left behind, or I forgot my camera, or whatever? And he's like, nah, not really. And he's like, in fact, he's like, the last 2 years, I don't. I took my iPad and I took a couple pictures, but I didn't even take pictures. And at the time, I was like, how can you go and chase storms and not take pictures? And for the last couple of years, I've realized like
Wow.
I haven't really. I mean, I take a couple.
hmm
I put them on my blog, and my mom likes my blog, and that's it. But the whole experience of being there
hmm
is even more than what I'm taking with
Oh,
my
I love
my
that.
pictures. So yeah, I mean that's part of it
Absolutely.
too.
Don't man,
Sure.
I'm a little jealous for that, and I that it gives me a goal that even though I am a photographer and I really want to
Mhm.
capture beautiful shots, that I still have to learn to set that stuff up where I can get the shots, but I can also still sit back and enjoy the storms.
Sure.
Such a great lesson, I'm sure. And just pick your brain. I may have to do that back in Grand Island next year or this year as it comes up. So hopefully we'll meet up again.
Sure.
But this lightning round goes pretty quick. Are you ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Let's do
right.
it.
I'm gonna start off with the first one, which was you brought it up, but Forerunner or Crown Victoria.
Graphic.
Crown Vic's gonna beat every other car out there for
Yep.
sure. All right. What about auroras or supercells? Have you ever seen auroras before?
I have not seen Aurora. It's on my list of things to see, but
Oh wow.
supercells, yeah,
Cool, cool.
supercells, I would say.
Well, what about? I think I might know the answer to this one. Tornadoes or structure?
Ooh, that's tough because I'm not going to turn down a tornado, but in the end, I'd rather see a nice, perfect structure, and not, even like in a little LP cell that's just spinning like a barber pole, than some
Yeah.
scrawny, low contrast nighttime tornado. So
Right.
I
Right.
tend toward structure.
All right. Sounds good. What's one word to describe the feeling of conquering a challenge?
I saw this one. This was the hardest one on the whole thing.
It is.
I mean, something along the lines of what's next. I
Mm,
don't want to be like next, but I say a lot of times, and I think this is sorry. This was supposed to be quick.
that's
A lot
okay.
of times, and I think storm chasers are guilty of this too. I'm definitely guilty of it. A lot of times we forget what we've accomplished as soon as we've accomplished it.
Right.
So I think a lot of times, like I get a
Yeah.
forecast that comes together. Okay, it's done. Next thing, I have a to-do list that's got 60 things on it right now. I
Exactly.
may get them all done tonight, and it doesn't matter if I leave two. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so next, and that's probably not the answer I want.
No,
So
that
in
is
terms of future
awesome.
development, that's what I want. That's where I want to go.
Hell to
When
the
you do this
yes.
interview 10 years, when you do this interview 10 years from now, I hope I can look back and say, here's the answer to that question.
Seth, that's a perfect answer. I love that. Thank you. Next, right? Like, boom. Yes, I
Yeah.
got that sucker. Next. What's
Yep.
next? Let's move it on. Let's move on. I love it. Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
Ooh, okay.
I'm up 4:30 every morning most of the
Oh,
time.
oh. I'm up at 4, but not because I want to be. So, what's the top item on your bucket list?
So, this was the next hardest one. I want to see an aurora. I haven't done that. The big problem I have with bucket list is it implies that you're going to do it once.
Yeah.
For me, I'm like, if it's something I like to do, I think storm chasing was probably my bucket list at some
hmm
point. But then once I like doing something, I figure out how to do it multiple times. But treating each one as though I only go there once. Like,
Nice.
don't. It's really easy to take advantage of like, oh, I'll go see that next time. I don't have a list that's like, I'm going to do this thing one time.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'm going to try lots of things, and if I like them, I'm going to go back.
Right on. Right on. Well, sounds good, Seth. I know we could keep going on, but I look
Yeah.
forward to seeing that Crown Vic out there on the plains this summer, much as possible. I'm so glad that you give other kids the opportunity that you're able to do that and that you came up with that idea of being able to, share that same kind of joy that you have and share that joy with others, and hopefully spark that same interest in the younger generation that are coming up, who are popping up on Twitter and creating accounts, and they're getting excited also. There's nothing like seeing that.
Sure.
And I do want to raise it. I can't raise them, but I want to see a generation raised up that focuses on just sharing, celebrating each other's successes, less drama,
Sure.
more fun, and all that
Yeah.
good stuff. So it was great talking to someone who is so experienced in chasing like you, and for just supporting so many other people, and supporting everybody to chase and to chase their passion. So again, thank you so much, Seth.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was good fun.
All right. Well, that was the latest podcast. You can find more of them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the pretty much anywhere you can find them. You can also find them on YouTube. This video version on my Lori Grace AZ channel. So if you go to YouTube /user/Lori Grace AZ, you can find this podcast also. And I look forward to seeing you out underneath the meso. Until then, be well, everybody. Take care. And we'll